Strategy without tactics is the slowest route to victory. Tactics without strategy is the noise before defeat. That's Sun Tzu, right? Getting straight to the point about planning and, well, competition.
Always relevant, Sun Tzu.
Definitely. And today we're taking a deep dive into a piece that really dissects modern geopolitical strategy, particularly in South Asia. It draws some pretty sharp lines, maybe uncomfortable ones.
We're looking at a recent article from the Eurasian Times, right?
Yeah.
One that analyzes China's approach towards Pakistan.
Exactly. And it frames it very specifically as a counter to India's rise.
Yeah, this isn't just, looking at headlines or military spending in isolation. The article tries to get at the deeper strategic game, or at least that's the argument it presents.
And it kicks up with a core comparison that might make you sit up a bit.
It does. It compares China's support for Pakistan to the U.S.-Israel relationship. That's the central analogy it explores.
Right. And look, if you're trying to make sense of international relations today, especially in South Asia, this is pretty relevant. And particularly if you're studying for something like the UPSC exams.
Oh, absolutely. Understanding these dynamics is key for Maine's current affairs, even prelims.
So our mission here is to help you cut through the noise, unpack the key arguments from this source, the evidence it uses, and, the implications it points to. Let's start with that analogy, the foundation of the article's argument.
Okay, so the source begins by outlining a theory, one it says is often discussed by critics, that paints Israel as functioning, sort of like a colonial outpost.
A colonial outpost. How does the article explain that viewpoint?
Well, according to this specific perspective presented in the article, the idea is that Western powers, mainly the U.S., but it also mentions the U.K. and France, have supposedly used Israel to, destabilize the Middle East to serve their own strategic interests.
Okay, and how does the article claim this enabling works, according to that theory?
The source details several mechanisms. It highlights arming Israel with the latest weapons, for one, and significant financial backing.
How significant?
The article cites a figure over USD $228 billion in U.S. military assistance to Israel between 1946 and 2024.
Wow, that's a huge number.
It is. And the source notes this makes Israel the highest recipient of U.S. military aid globally, which the article points out is interesting because Israel isn't a NATO member, doesn't have a formal defense treaty with the U.S.
That level of financial support mentioned is certainly striking. What other kinds of support does the source bring up?
Diplomatic cover, that's heavily emphasized. The article mentions the U.S. vetoing over 45 UN Security Council resolutions critical of Israel.
45.
And it stresses how recent this is, pointing out 5 of those vetoes happened just since October 7th, 2023. Intelligence sharing is also listed as, a crucial part of this relationship, according to the source.
And there was a specific U.S. policy mentioned, too, the qualitative military edge.
Right, the QME. The article explains this as the U.S. commitment to ensuring Israel maintains, basically, a military superiority, better technology, better capabilities compared to its neighbors.
And it gives an example.
Yeah, the F-35 fighter jet. Israel is the only country in the Middle East operating it, even though other U.S. allies like the UAE and Saudi Arabia have apparently asked for it. The article uses this to show preference. It also talks about dependency. It states that, according to its sources, around 78% of Israel's weapons come from the U.S.
Okay, so pulling that together, what effect does the article claim all this support has had, based on the theory it presents?
Well, the theory outlined in the article suggests the cumulative effect is that this support allowed the U.S. to destabilize Middle Eastern countries. It argues it helped counter Arab pan-nationalism back in the 50s and 60s.
Right.
And ultimately, this view contends it contributed to the region being fractured today, despite its, strategic importance and resources.
And the article's main point is that this strategic model, however you view the Israel example itself, hasn't gone unnoticed elsewhere.
Exactly. The source argues that rising powers, China in particular, are looking very closely at this kind of, playbook.
Okay, let's shift gears then. The second big piece the article lays out is the growing competition between China and India.
Right. So China's obviously got its global competition with the U.S., but this article suggests Beijing increasingly sees India as its main long-term strategic and geopolitical competitor.
Not just regionally.
Not just in Asia, the article argues, but globally too.
And the source really emphasizes India's rise, doesn't it?
It does spend some time on that. It highlights India being the world's fourth largest economy now, projected to hit third by 2027, overtaking Germany.
Fastest growing large economy too, right?
Yeah, set to grow faster than China, the article notes.
Yep.
And of course, becoming the most populous country in 2023. Now, it does acknowledge China's economy is still way bigger, almost 6 times larger. But it identifies India as a formidable challenger, especially in terms of human capital, future potential.
And with growing strength comes potential friction. Where does the article see the main clash points?
It points to several areas: Southeast Asia, the Indo-Pacific, South Asia itself, and Central Asia. It even mentions India's historical cultural influence in some of these regions, calling it unrivaled in parts of Central and Southeast Asia, and even within China, specifically mentioning Tibet.
And then there's the very physical point of friction, the border.
Crucially, yes, the nearly 3,500-kilometer disputed border. The article reminds us of past conflicts: 1962 war, the 67 Nathula incident, Doklam in 2018, and the Ladakh clash in 2020.
Which was deadly.
Yes. And the article's argument is basically, as India gets stronger and more assertive, the chances of this unsettled border dispute flaring up again increase.
Okay, so this connects back to the article's main thesis, linking it to that initial U.S.-Israel comparison. China applying a similar strategy with Pakistan.
That's the core argument. China is actively cultivating Pakistan, the article claims, to become its Israel, a tool to keep India off balance, tied down in South Asia.
India often talks about a potential two-front war. How does this article reframe that?
It suggests it's maybe not a classic two-front war against two separate enemies. It's more like India facing the combined capabilities of two states acting together, battling China's military and tech through Pakistan on one very long front.
And the article uses a recent clash, which it calls Operation Sindoor, as evidence for this. What specifics does it highlight from that?
It points to several things from Operation Sindoor as interpreted evidence. China supplying Pakistan with advanced weapons, providing satellite support, specifically mentioning the Beidou system for targeting the kill chain.
So direct technological integration.
Yes. And it suggests China was involved in Pakistan's wartime strategy. Also, the article claims China used the clash to combat test its own weapon systems.
In a live situation.
Right. And beyond the military stuff, it mentions financial support, like a $3.7 billion offer in soft loans or deferred payments, and diplomatic cover for Pakistan at places like the UN. Plus, joint military drills building coordination.
So the article's take is that China's goal isn't just helping an ally, it's strategically using Pakistan to manage the Indian challenge.
That's the argument. Arm Pakistan enough so it effectively ties India down in South Asia, which, the article claims, helps Beijing's larger goal, preventing Delhi from becoming a really significant global challenger.
Does the article see advantages for China in this strategy?
It lists a few. One key one, it argues, is potentially degrading India's military capabilities without China having to get directly involved in fighting, which is costly, politically risky.
It draws a parallel there.
Yeah, it compares it to Western support for Ukraine against Russia, enabling the fight while limiting direct great power involvement. A second advantage mentioned is combat testing Chinese weapons.
Right, you mentioned that. Getting real-world data, boosting sales potential.
Exactly. The source claims countries like Indonesia and Azerbaijan showed interest in Chinese jets after this clash, seeing them perform.
That's a pretty cold calculation presented there. What about the geopolitical image aspect?
Yes, that's important too. The source argues this strategy helps China manage its image, particularly in the global south. China wants to be seen as a leader there, right? Different from the West.
So a direct war with India
would be bad PR, according to the article. A geopolitical public relations nightmare, it calls it, undermining China's standing with other developing nations. But acting through Pakistan, that avoids the direct fallout, the article posits, while still achieving the strategic aim against India.
And Pakistan's role in all this, according to the source.
It describes Pakistan as a pawn in China's game. But it quickly adds a more than happy pawn, as long as this relationship helps Islamabad achieve what the source calls hyphenation with New Delhi, basically, strategic parity or perceived equality.
Let's dig a bit deeper into the military specifics the article presents, especially around Operation Sindoor. It gets quite detailed there.
Yeah, it really tries to show the depth of the integration. It highlights Pakistan's heavy reliance on Chinese arms. Cites Saipuri data between 2020 and 2024, 81% of Pakistan's weapons reportedly came from China.
81%. That's huge.
It is. And the source makes a point of saying this is even higher than Israel's dependency on U.S. arms. That's a key data point for its core analogy.
Very striking.
Yeah.
What specific Chinese systems does the article list as being used during Operation Sindor?
Okay, so it mentions JF-17 and the newer J-10C warplanes, PL-15 air-to-air missiles, and the HQ-9 and HQ-16 air defense systems. Also drones. And again, it stresses the use of the Beidou satellite system for the kill chain.
So it's enabling operations at a pretty fundamental level, not just selling hardware.
Exactly. The source actually frames this clash as a bit of a boon for the reputation of Chinese jets internationally, mentioning that interest from Indonesia and Azerbaijan again, reinforcing that idea of China benefiting from proxy conflict testing.
But the article also notes some vulnerabilities were exposed for Pakistan.
It does. A key one it identifies was Pakistan's apparent inability to effectively stop India's BrahMos missiles. The article claims these missiles got through defenses, hit air bases, showing a significant gap.
And China reacted to this. The article suggests China is trying to plug those specific gaps now.
Yes, that's what the source claims. A reactive effort by China. It mentions promises of future supplies to Pakistan, things like fifth-generation J-35 fighters, more advanced HQ-19 air defense systems, KJ-500 airborne early warning aircraft, and more CM-400 air-launched ballistic missiles.
More advanced stuff.
And it even mentions speculation about China supplying an FK-400 mobile air defense system, which reportedly uses high-powered microwave weapons, so potentially moving into next-gen tech.
Definitely beyond just conventional arms. Does the support extend beyond military hardware too?
Absolutely. The article notes non-military stuff, like Huawei training 100,000 Pakistanis in IT and AI. The source suggests this builds tech capabilities relevant to modern warfare. And the financial support, like that $3.7 billion debt deferment, is also crucial for enabling Pakistan militarily.
Now, the article makes an important point about a change in China's support over time compared to past conflicts.
Right. This is a key observation in the source. In earlier India-Pakistan conflicts, 65, 71, even Kargil in 99, China's support for Pakistan was more, let's say, verbal, maybe some covert help. Beijing seemed careful not to antagonize India too openly.
But that changed recently.
The article argues this caution was basically gone during the recent clash. China offered a pretty unequivocal and open support to Islamabad militarily and diplomatically, a definite shift according to the analysis.
And the reason given for this shift?
Primarily China's massive economic growth. The article points out that until the 90s, India and China's economies weren't drastically different in size. But over the last couple of decades, China's economy has exploded, becoming nearly 6 times larger than India's.
Giving them more confidence.
That's the argument. This huge economic gap gives Beijing new confidence, makes it more willing to openly back Pakistan, even with its most advanced military gear.
So summing up this section, what's the article's conclusion about where this China-Pakistan relationship is headed?
It's pretty direct. The source expects this nexus to get even stronger, and it warns that in future conflicts, India might essentially be facing the inexhaustible military-industrial complex of China, but channeled through Pakistan.
Wow. That perspective leads right into the final big point the article raises, India's strategic response. And it questions India's traditional approach.
Yeah, it gives some context first. India's history, the Cold War treaty with the Soviet Union to counter the China-Pakistan-U.S. axis. Then, post-Cold War, really doubling down on strategic autonomy.
Which has mostly worked well.
The article notes it has generally served India well, allowing engagement with multiple powers without getting locked into one bloc.
But now the article asks, is India hitting a dead end with this multi-alignment policy, given this tightening China-Pakistan axis?
That's the provocative question the source poses. And its main evidence, again, comes from that Operation Sindor incident. It observes that while China, Turkey, Azerbaijan openly backed Pakistan, hardly any country openly supported India's narrative.
Despite India being part of so many groups.
Exactly. The article lists them: BRICS founder, SKO member, G20, Quad-Ed, attends G7 talks, defense ties with Russia, France, US, Israel. It shows India is multi-aligned.
So the core question from the source is, does sticking to strategic autonomy mean you might lack strong vocal support when you really need it in a crisis?
That's the dilemma it highlights. Maintaining independence is valuable, but does it mean fewer countries are willing or politically able to offer explicit public backing when things get tough against a dedicated partnership like China-Pakistan appears to be becoming?
And the article's final thought on India's strategy.
It concludes that as this China-Pakistan nexus strengthens driven, it argues, by Beijing's goal of checking India-New Delhi faces a really critical challenge. It needs to figure out how to balance that valued strategic autonomy with cultivating genuinely reliable friendships.
Friendships that deliver tangible support when tested.
Exactly. Diplomatic and strategic support that shows up during crunch time.
Well, that Eurasian Times article certainly gives us a lot to chew on. We've unpacked its pretty striking U.S.-Israel comparison for the China-Pakistan relationship.
Looked at the source's view on India's rise as a key competitor driving this.
Explored the details of China's alleged strategy using Pakistan, the military and tech cooperation examples cited from Operation Sindoor.
And discussed the challenge this poses to India's traditional strategic thinking, its multi-alignment approach.
Understanding this analysis as presented in the source is definitely important for grasping current geopolitical shifts, especially in South Asia, and for you listeners preparing for exams like UPSC.
Yeah, these insights into strategic doctrines, military dependencies, the complexities of international relations, it's all directly relevant for Maine's current affairs and helps build that solid base for prelims too.
And for everyone, really, it shows how these big power shifts can create new strategic games with, well, potentially significant consequences.
Definitely.
So, thinking about the analysis in this source, here's maybe a final thought to consider. If this model, a big power propping up another state to counter a rival, becomes more common, how do countries like India, that really value their independence, navigate this? How do you realistically get reliable allies who'll stand up publicly in a crisis without giving up that strategic freedom?
It's a tough balancing act. The article really pushes us to think if multi-alignment needs something more ensuring active public support from partners when conflict actually happens, not just during peacetime cooperation.
Absolutely. Well, we hope this deep dive into the points raised by the Eurasian Times article was useful for you, whether you're deep in UPSC prep or just trying to stay informed.
If you found it insightful, do like and subscribe to the channel.
And please, leave your thoughts in the comments. Any questions, further insights, especially how you see this playing out, or how it connects to your studies, or just your understanding of the world. We'd love to hear from you. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.